Right. Okay. So, how are you doing today, Dan?
Just great. How are you?
Not too bad. And I will say, I took a part in the local elections last cycle, and it is often that I read your articles in the Coppell Chronicle. Um, so it is nice to meet you um, face to face.
Thanks.
Right.
I'm
Okay.
trying to get
So,
in, I'm trying to get to a place where I have a strong enough signal.
okay.
All right. Let's try this.
Yes, this is actually way better video quality
Okay.
wise. Okay, so I don't want to take too much of your time. I know you're on vacation, but if you could start off by just giving a brief introduction about your career so far, where you've worked, how you've come to work, where you have worked.
Uh, yeah. So I was a professional journalist full time for nearly 20 years. I worked at the Dallas Morning News for 8 years in
Mhm.
various roles. For 5.5 years after that, I ran a chain of community newspapers that were affiliated with D Magazine. The flagship newspaper was called Park Cities People. It still is called Park Cities People. I just don't work there anymore. Uh, about 9 years ago, I took a job as a writer and editor for a labor union in the airline industry. So I got out of journalism, but I missed it. And when I moved to Coppell 20 years ago, when I moved to Coppell 12 years ago, Coppell had two weekly newspapers, the Citizens Advocate and the Coppell Gazette. And the one that I thought was the stronger of the two, the Citizens Advocate, shut down in 2020, the first year of the pandemic. So I saw a void to fill. So I started the Coppell Chronicle in 2021 to replace the Citizens Advocate as a local journalism outlet run by somebody from Coppell.
Right. Okay. That is really inspiring. So now that that's out of the way, moving on to the actual main topic of this interview, misinformation. So I just wanted to ask you because you obviously, as a journalist, do have great experience regarding this, and um, misinformation can look different on different levels. Obviously, we know how it pans out on a more national level. How does misinformation look like at the local level?
You still see it. You see, it's funny. You see people. There's a local Facebook group for Coppell residents,
Mhm.
and every I'm sure every suburb and every town in America has or more of these, and it cracks me up how people like. It makes sense to me that people will go there and want to know about local issues, so they will turn to their neighbors for information. But it cracks me up how often people use it as a substitute for Google, where they want to know like where's the best place to stay when you're going to the Virgin Islands, you know,
Uh,
and they're, I'm just pulling that out, but that's just an example of a random question that you might see in this group, and their source is just people that happen to live close to them. Like, why is that a trustworthy group of people on that particular topic?
right.
Um, I do see, and I'm not going to come up with a concrete example off the top of my head, but I do see when we have uh, local issues, whether it's elections or a vote by the city council, or whether a restaurant is shutting down or opening up in a new location. I do see people pose questions, and there will be some misinformation. And I'm happy to report that a lot of times people will correct the record by pointing to something that I've published.
That is nice.
Yeah, so that's a nice uh, endorsement of what I'm doing with the Chronicle.
Hmm. Yeah, I can see that. And so you mentioned how misinformation often originates in informal communication, like as you said, Facebook groups and such like that. And sometimes, as we've seen, these sources of misinformation are often a little more credible, come from often big publication places, and these causes or these perpetuations may be intentional or unintentional. So, as a journalist, so are there differences in the way the misinformation is propagated is intended to be so, when you compare it from one organization to another? Like, as you said, in the local level, a Facebook post might not be the most harmful of a spread of misinformation, while on a national broadcasting network, something uttered wrong could have lasting impacts.
Uh, um, I'm afraid I'm not understanding what it is you're asking me
Right.
with your question.
So, sorry about that. So, basically, what are the different intentions for doing so, right? If it is knowingly or unknowingly the spread of misinformation.
Well, I would hope that a legitimate news organization would never be intentionally spreading misinformation. Like I'm obviously biased towards journalists because I am one, but I
Hmm.
always trust posts from professional news outlets on social media much more than I trust posts from individuals. Professional journalists may not get their facts right 100% of the time, but they are trying to do so 100% of the time. And
Right.
most established media outlets will publish a correction and or delete a post if they get something wrong.
Mm. Okay.
Um, when I see, I know you've got this effort to educate other young people about not spreading misinformation they see on the internet. Personally, before I share a post from an unknown account, I always check the replies or the comments under the post to see whether the information in the post has been immediately debunked. Because a lot of
Right.
times that is the case.
Hmm.
I'll something will strike me as funny or ironic or insightful, but before I share it, I'll just look and see how people are reacting to it. Because I have been burned before where I retweeted something or I reposted something and then found out later that the person that whose content I was sharing didn't know what they were talking about at all.
Right. Right. Yes, I can see that happening. And when that happens, as in you mentioned news organizations posting corrections and such like that, in your opinion, how effective are those corrections at reaching the general populace? Because it is often that the first piece of information that you hear is the one that sticks to you the most. So I
Yeah.
was just hoping to get your perspective on that.
Yeah. I mean, the problem is that corrections usually are rarely played as big, as prominently as the thing that they're correcting. Like
Right.
the Dallas Morning News or the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal can get something wrong in a front page story, and the correction about the thing they got wrong will be played in a blurb on page two that's about that big at the bottom, right?
Right.
Um, and they rarely uh, go out of their way to make and the the description I just gave is like about a print product. Hardly anybody's reading a newspaper in print
Mhm.
anymore. But if you want to look at it in terms of their website, the headline that they got there probably won't even be a headline that they got something wrong. It'll just be a fix to the end of the story in which they got something wrong.
Mhm.
There it's something has to be really egregious for there to be a second story that's just about the fact that they got something wrong, right?
Right, right. And and then why do you think that these corrections, as you said, are often downplayed so much?
Because a lot of times the correction is about something minor. it's not about the crux of the story. It's like, like the third person they interviewed, the third most important person they interviewed, they spelled his name wrong. Like
Okay.
those are the kind of
Right. Right.
corrections that you see the most. Or I'm trying to think of one that I read recently. I'm not going to remember what the topic of the story was, but I do remember that I read a news story recently where the correction was that they said they reached out to somebody for comment and they actually never did. So
Ah.
I wonder how that correction even came to be. Like my knee jerk reaction was that the person that they said they reached out to for comment read the story, read the paragraph that said that they reached out to him for comment and said, no, you didn't. Like I don't know how
Right.
else how that would ever get published.
Right. Right. So that does make sense how these corrections are often minute details. But in instances where there are major, in your experience, is it often that they are published as big stories as well, so as to make sure viewers get their perceptions right?
Yeah, like God, this was before you were born, but when I worked at the Dallas Morning News in the 2000s, there was a guy that wrote for the New York Times named Jason Blair,
Hmm.
who it was discovered that he was just making things up. He was just he was turning in stories and just they were fabricated. He was making up
Ah,
quotes, he was making up sources, and I don't remember how they how his bosses figured this out, but for whatever reason they got wind of this and they were asking him to prove that these people that he had quoted in stories existed and he could not prove it. And I I was working at the Dallas Morning News at the time, and newspapers around the country carry stories that are published by the New York Times and publish them in their own newspapers. So there was an editor who was tasked with figuring out how many Jason Blair stories we had published in the morning news, and then we had to issue corrections for all of them, like basically
wow.
retract everything because we couldn't trust anything that this guy had reported.
Right. So does this?
I haven't thought about that guy's name in years. I wonder where he is today. If he's uh,
Hmm.
what he does for a living, because it can't be journalism.
Right, that does make sense. And you mentioned, because does sound like a really, really big scandal. And certainly the way to identify misinformation is not often the most straightforward for most people. So how would you say, with your experience, that what are some warning signs that
So
yeah.
if you're looking at social media, I'm always suspicious of a post that begins with the word breaking in all
Mm,
caps and doesn't link to anything that provides any backup information. Where it's
right.
just, breaking, whatever it is. I've got a declarative statement about something that's true, and then it's just that statement, and there's nothing to back it up. There's no link to a website somewhere where there is more information.
Mm,
If it's that if it's something that you're presenting as so important and so groundbreaking, you're probably not going to limit your reporting on it to social media. There's probably going to be a website somewhere with a thoroughly reported story with facts and quotes, right? So if
right.
that's missing, I'm not really going to trust what it is that I'm seeing on the social media outlet.
Right. And you mentioned social media, and social media is one of the breeding ground for such misconceptions. And what are some and I'm as you have mentioned examples, there are also sometimes false stories in major news outlets and such. But what are some warning signs that you can use as well to figure out if some things published online by news outlets that may not be as prominent could also be perpetuating the not the entire truth?
Uh, you gotta look at is does the outlet have an agenda? Like, obviously, I'm somebody who used to work at the Dallas Morning News, so even though they do get things wrong, I think that they are out to just report what is going on in the world and
Mhm.
inform their readers with no ulterior motives or agenda.
Right.
Whereas, you know, the Attorney General of Texas recently sued Coppell ISD,
Mhm.
and that lawsuit all stemmed from surreptitiously recorded videos of a CISD administrator by a organization called Accuracy in Media. And if you
Mhm.
watch the videos, if you read their reports, they have an agenda. They are pushing school choice. They are pushing vouchers that people can
Right.
use for private school. They are very much against public schools. They are not a mainstream talk to everybody on both sides, play it down the middle news organization. They are an advocacy organization that is masquerading as a media outlet,
Mm. Right.
even though their name is Accuracy in Media. Also,
Right.
also
Right.
you gotta also take all of their stuff with a grain of salt, and cast a suspicious eye towards it, because they um, interviewed that CISD administrator and administrators from several other school districts around Texas with hidden cameras. People didn't know
Mhm.
they were being recorded. Legitimate journalists don't do that.
Right. Right. So you are saying that some journalistic practices might come into question when you are looking for signs that some information may not be entirely right.
Yeah, yeah. If it, there's a way to do things right as a journalist, and there are ways to do it wrong. And one of the ways to do it wrong is to record people without their knowledge.
Right. Right. Um, and since you mentioned how vastly different news agencies can be, with them having an agenda or not, in your experience with working with various organizations, do you find that local newspapers are often, to say, more sound about local issues than are large organizations?
Yes. When there is when there's a major news story happening in a city, that's not New York, Washington, that's not Dallas, my first move is to go to the daily newspaper in that city and read their reporting if I can, if it's not behind a
Right.
paywall. If there's some major disaster in Portland, Oregon, then I'm going to go to the website of the Oregonian, the daily newspaper in Portland. If there's something happening in Miami, Florida, I'm going to go to the website of the Miami Herald. I'm always going to trust the people who live and report in that city on a daily basis, as opposed to the national news organizations that are going to send somebody there on a plane because something is happening.
Right. And to what effect do you think that the lack of recognition for local newspapers amongst the vast populace leads to this spread of misconceptions and misinformation?
But yeah, I mean, you're talking about my business model for the Coppell Chronicle. I think that, of course, I think that this community would be best served if every resident of Coppell subscribed to the Coppell Chronicle.
Hmm.
um,
Right.
Everybody would be a lot more informed about what's going on at City Hall and at the CISD administration building and with
Mm.
Dart's Silver Line and everything else that I write about. Um,
Right.
I think that, and that's not unique to Coppell. I think that our country would be better off if everybody subscribed to the newspaper or the online outlet in their community that covers their
Mm.
community the best, because a more robust uh, journalism industry leads to a more well-read and informed populace.
Right. Right. I can see that. And why do you think it is so that community papers have, throughout history, slowly declined in popularity, especially in the United States?
Well, they've declined because of the internet. Um,
Mm.
the their business model has been corrupted, not corrupted, but upended
Mhm.
by the internet. Like when I was your age, if you wanted to find somebody, if you wanted to find an employee for your job, you had to take out a classified ad at a newspaper. Well, now that's all done online. If you
Right.
wanted to, when I was your age, we would, if you wanted to go see a movie at a movie theater, you would open up the newspaper because the times for each show
Mm.
and each day would be printed in that
Right.
day's newspaper. Now that's on the web. So most of the things that people paid, like all of their money has dried up because people are no longer paying for advertising, and then that makes the newspaper small. It's like the chicken or the egg. Like they have less money from advertisers, so they have less money to pay journalists, so they have fewer journalists, which leads to fewer news, less news in the newspaper, so or on their website. So now they have fewer people coming to read it. It's
Right.
just this endless cycle.
Mm. And so we have understood that community papers are often the best sources when it comes to local issues and to combat misinformation on that scale. And what other ways do you think are there to combat misinformation other than obviously looking at local sources?
Like I was saying earlier, just don't just automatically share something without looking into it first. Like before you share something, think about who who put this out there. Who are they? Like what authority do they have to be saying this? Why should I take their word for it? Where did they get
Mhm.
this information? Like, just don't be so quick to share something without checking it yourself or just questioning it for a minute.
Right. Okay. That was very insightful. Thank you. Because it is hard to find uh, local perspectives in local newspapers to shed their perspectives on various issues, and it is often that we neglect what is going on in the local level and focus hugely on the wider nation, even though we fail to understand that it is often local politics that affect our lives the most, our day-to-day
Oh yeah.
lives the most.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
So I think that is all I have, Dan. Thank you again for agreeing to do this. And I hope this conversation was as helpful for me as it was for you.
I'm curious. Who else have you interviewed for this?
So this was something that I started quite recently because, as I told you, um, this during the election in November, that was when I started to look at your newspaper way more often because I was helping a few local races. And
Hmm.
that is when I realized that the idea of misinformation, and especially during an election, is particularly damaging and important because voters often fall prey to sources that may not be the most sound. And as we discussed before, the first impression that they have, it's hard to shake that off,
Yeah.
right? So I just started this after retrospection and after I've gotten a little free, um, to try and spread, especially amongst teens who have high social media usage and are often first-time social media users, to spread awareness regarding that. And my first goal was to contact local journalists. And you are the first person that came to my mind
Okay.
because your
Um,
publications I've read a lot.
I saw the events on your website. Do you have anybody signed up to go to the one tomorrow?
Yes, I have some people from my school uh, who have come to that, and that is really not inspiring, hopeful.
Yeah.
Uh,
Do you want me to publicize the other ones in my next edition? You've got some other ones
Um,
in May.
I actually think I should hold off on that a little because I haven't had the details completely confirmed on that.
Okay.
But I would greatly appreciate your help if you could do that after I get the details confirmed and I could
Yeah,
email you.
when you're ready, just let me know.
Yes, thank you, Dan. That's really helpful. And before I let you go, I was hoping to ask you, might you know any other journalists that I may be able to interview to gain a different perspective on this issue and different voices?
Yeah, I got plenty. I got all kinds of friends and colleagues that I've worked with. Let me think about it, and Um,
Hmm.
I'll email you a list of people that you might want to talk to. Some that are in this community
Hmm.
that live in Coppell ISD or right outside of it, and others that are
Right,
just in the Dallas area.
right. That is most helpful. Thank you, Dan.
All right.
Right, and I don't want to take any more time from your staycation. I hope you enjoy your week.
All right. Good talking to you.
Thank you. Have
Bye
a good
bye.
day.